Now, while we're on climate alarmists, let's have a look at one of the most obvious Green left opinionistas at the ABC. Paul Barry hosts Media Watch, a weekly 15-minute show that doesn't so much hold the media to account, but push Barry's Green left agenda and relentlessly and often deceptively attack News Corp media like Sky News. Barry seems to have issues with News Corp. But first and foremost, like any Green left activist these days, Barry is a climate alarmist. He's not big on facts or fact-checking, he just likes the climate hysteria vibe. And last night, he had another crack.
And finally, to a message on climate change from the editors of some New South Wales country newspapers.
Forget the poetry, we need action.
The poetry being Dorothea Mackellar's 1908 classic, My Country.
Of drought and flooding rains.
And the memo from the editors was clear.
It's an enduring piece of prose, but not a disclaimer for our political representatives to hide behind.
Climate change is happening now. Our region is suffering its effects now.
OK, well, it's poetry rather than prose, but OK, it is a fact that the newspaper editors said that. But Barry did not check whether it was true. Barry did not check any records or find a fact. That's not his thing. For him, it's the vibe, the climate hysteria vibe. And, of course, the News Corp thing too. Have a look.
Seems our experts keep forgetting that Australia really is a land of droughts and flooding rains. Flooding rains follow droughts, which follow rains, which follow droughts.
That was Andrew Bolt last month. And here's another poetry fan on Sky reacting to the floods in Western New South Wales.
We're always going to have floods in this land of droughts and flooding rains. OK, so we all know the line, and Barry went on to mock this. But is Barry saying it's not true? Is he saying that the relentless cycle of drought and flood and bushfire is not as much a part of the Australian ecosystem as marsupials and eucalypts? Well, Barry doesn't seem to bother with scientific or factual questions like that. What he likes is alarmism.
2 weeks ago, the nation's top climate scientists had more bad news with a report on the state of the climate predicting
Dangerous bushfires will rage for longer. Torrential downpours will become more common and unrelenting heat waves will devastate communities across Australia.
That warning was greeted with scepticism by some commentators at Sky and by Chris Kenny in particular. And while we don't have a poem for him, we do have a proverb, which is relevant, dating back to 1546 and ultimately to the Bible. And it goes, "There are none so blind as those that will not see."
Yes. It's a bit tiresome, this, isn't it? Although always the catastrophic predictions and always the desperation to find them coming into reality. So Barry quotes a warning saying fires, droughts and floods will become worse. Then he points to floods and says, see, it's happening. I mean, imagine the intellectual rigour. That's not science. That's not journalism. That's just not sensible. If Barry had any intellectual integrity and if the ABC had any journalistic standards, Media Watch would at least check the records to see if the floods are records or if there are more of them, if things have gotten worse or whether he is just getting a little ahead of himself. As you know, I have demonstrated repeatedly, as recently as last night, where these bold claims about disasters being unprecedented just don't stack up. If we want to talk climate change, we have to have perspective and context. And nothing provides that better than history and, you know, the records. It turns out that Barry does lack a certain amount of local perspective. I mean, when the Murray had its biggest recorded flood in 1956, he was just a toddler in England. Chances are he never even heard about it growing up, nor would he have visited the river towns and seen the markers of the astonishing flood levels. And then, of course, there was the big flood of 1974. The floods this current one might yet rival. Well, Barry was a young man by then, in his 20s, but he was still in England. So those floods probably didn't cross his radar then either. And what about the drought of the early 80s and the horrendous Ash Wednesday bushfires of 1983? Yeah, they're scarred into our memories, aren't they? But Barry still wasn't here. It turns out that he arrived in Australia in the mid-1980s, so he's seen a bad drought, 2 bad fire seasons, and now he's seeing his first big Murray-Darling flood. And he's carrying on like Australia has changed before our very eyes. As you know, it hasn't. Look, he doesn't need to have been here all that time. You know, he could have always Googled a few facts. He could check a few records. He has a huge team of people at the ABC who could actually do that for him. I wonder why they don't. I mean, I've never been to Lamington National Park in Queensland, but it took me 5 minutes to find out that 2019 was not the first time its rainforests had burned. With just a little bit of effort, Barry might find that nothing bolsters an opinionated rant better than a few facts.